Welcome everyone to today's Technical Tuesday session, our July session. We're joined today by Connie Langer. I hope I've pronounced that right. Who's very, very kindly joining us from Connecticut in the USA, from Pfizer. And Alphonsus Carley, who's joining us from here in Singapore. Not as impressive, but we're still appreciative, also from Pfizer. And they're going to do a joint session today about facility efficient life cycle management via ICH Q12. So the format, for those of you that are used to our Technical Tuesday sessions, the format today will be slightly different. I believe the way it's going to go is that Alphonsus is going to ask Connie a series of questions, and Connie will give her answers. So however long that will be, usually the talks are probably 30 minutes or a half an hour. And of course, everyone listening in on the call can join in as well. If you've got questions that you want Alphonsus to add in, you can add them to the group chat, or else if you'd prefer to wait till the end, we'll have a Q&A session that will be open to the floor as per usual. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Alphonsus and Connie.
Yep, thanks, Kieran. Okay, give me a minute. Let me share my screen. Okay, so this is the first time we do Technical Tuesday, and we'll try to do our best here. So like Kieran mentioned, we will do a Q&A session around ICH Q12 and then the case study. This case study that mentioned in one of the articles that Connie wrote. I will go through the question with Connie, and then if you have any question, please hold your question until the end of the session. And then you also can use chat box to ask question, and Kieran will help me to look at the chat box or group chat. And then, yeah, I would like to thank Connie for making herself available in such short notice, as we have to cancel a regulatory divergent topic. Also, thanks, Connie, for waking up so early. It is 6:30 a.m. in Groton, Connecticut. Okay, without any delay, let's get started. Connie, perhaps I think before I go through all these questions with you, perhaps I think you may want to introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you, Alphonsus, and thank you, Kieran, for inviting me to participate in this forum. My name's Connie Langer, and I'm an Associate Director at Pfizer Global Product Development in Groton, Connecticut. I attended the University of Connecticut, where I earned a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering and a master's degree in oceanography. I went on to obtain a drug development certificate from Temple University, and I joined Pfizer 22 years ago as a scientist in the pharmacokinetics, dynamics, and metabolism group, where I was doing a lot of mass spec work. I'm currently a regulatory strategist in the global CMC department, and my main work is managing and executing lifecycle CMC regulatory activities. So that includes things from first-in-human studies, early clinical, through registration and post-approval lifecycle maintenance. I'm also a member of ISPE, Product Quality Lifecycle Implementation, or PQLI, ICH Q12 working team, and I co-chair the International Consortium for Innovation and Quality in Pharmaceutical Development, the ICH Q12 working group.
Okay, thanks, Connie. Okay, so let's start with the first question. Can you tell me about this article, the one that I'm showing now, and then it is published in PE Magazine for this month's edition. And then perhaps you can elaborate more like the purpose of this article.
Yeah, sure. So I think to start, the implementation of QBD as a science and risk-based approach to expand product knowledge and process understanding was intended really to serve a foundation for and encourage continual improvement, and thereby increase assurance of quality for pharmaceutical products. But we know that the adoption of QBD as a development paradigm was successful, but the implementation to support that regulatory application through the product life cycle was incomplete because there weren't really the regulatory foundation to do that implementation properly. And so with the advent of ICH Q12, we now have regulatory mechanisms to simplify, enable, and expedite post-approval variations and supplements. So this paper, the concept of established conditions, has emerged as one of those enabling mechanisms in Q12, and we use that to justify our post-approval change management plan. And this shows an actual case study where those new tools were made available and successfully used to gain approval of science-driven and risk-based reporting categories to enable those post-approval changes and product improvements in the United States.
Okay, thanks, Connie. The second question that I have, like for those who do not know ICH Q12, can you kindly summarize this guideline in few sentences?
Yeah, sure. So this guideline was implemented in November of 2019, and the title is The Technical and Regulatory Considerations for Pharmaceutical Product Lifecycle Management. And this is really a transformational guideline and has a wide scope of applicability across drug substances, drug products, both chemical and biological. Also can be used for drug device combination products, and it can be applied for registration of new molecular entities as well as already authorized products. Q12 builds on the framework that was established in ICH Q8, Q9, Q10, and Q11, and it aims to address key remaining technical and regulatory hurdles that prevented that full adoption and realization of flexible science and risk-based approaches to post-approval change management during commercial manufacturing. So ICH Q12 defines various tools and approaches that you can use to facilitate CMC management. So the things that are included in there are established conditions, risk-based reporting categories, a product lifecycle management document, or PLCM, and also a post-approval change management protocol, or PACMP. And the PACMP is not a new thing. It's a tool that some countries already have available, and it gives the opportunity to prospectively manage future changes in a more strategic manner. The difference now is by including it in Q12, it has a more global applicability.
Okay, so before I go to the next question, the question that I have now is about the new biologics. So this is also applicable to new biologics products, right, Connie?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, thank you. If I understand correctly from the article, QBD is a prerequisite to apply Q12. Does it mean that all products which was developed before QBD concept are not able or allowed to apply Q12, even though the drug product may have been manufactured for more than 10 years or more?
That's a really good question. So although using QBD as a science-driven and risk-based approach is very helpful in justifying risk-based reporting categories, it's not a prerequisite to apply ICH Q12. So I think Q12 is intended to work with the guidelines ICH Q8 through a Q11 to provide a framework to facilitate the management of post-approval changes. And it does allow regulators, both assessors and inspectors, to better understand and have more confidence and trust in the firm's pharmaceutical quality system, or PQS, for management of the post-approval changes. And ICH Q12 introduced concepts that can be used to proactively identify post-approval changes and the mechanism to submit and assess the changes by regulatory authorities. Also establish criteria for post-approval change management protocols that can be adopted by the ICH regions, and to encourage enhanced product development and control strategy approaches. So in that way, apply concepts in QBD, providing opportunities for science and risk-based foundations for post-approval management plans. But you'll notice those first two things I mentioned are really independent of using a QBD approach. And in fact, older products, like you mentioned, things that have been manufactured for more than 10 years would be actually really good candidates for application of Q12, because by then you would have a lot of manufacturing experience, more than you did when you made your first original application, that you could use to leverage certain reporting categories.
Okay. So the other question that I also have, Connie, I mean, for those generics, Pfizer, we do have a generics product as well. So do you think if we want to register a new generic, we can apply this concept as well?
That's a good question too. I read in the guideline that it's applicable to innovative products, and application to generics could be decided kind of country by country as they were implementing the guideline. So I guess that kind of remains to be seen in each of the regions.
Okay. Okay, we understand that EC, or established condition, is the heart and soul of ICH Q12, and the article says that ECs represent the company's license to operate, by which decisions on post-approval changes are made. Can you elaborate more on this statement and how ECs are set up?
Okay. So Q12 really establishes a harmonized approach to defining which elements in the application are considered necessary to assure product quality, and therefore would require regulatory submission if you change them. So established conditions are defined in the guideline as legally binding information considered necessary to assure product quality. And as a consequence, any changes to the ECs necessitates a submission to the regulatory authority. And ICH Q12 provides guidance on how to distinguish between supportive information and established conditions. So your regulatory application would consist of a mix of those two things. And the established conditions for manufacturing process should be defined based on the product and process understanding and taking into account the relevant elements of the control strategy. And the process parameters that are necessary to be controlled to ensure that a product of a required quality would be produced should be considered as established conditions. So the guideline provides a decision tree that illustrates a stepwise approach to identifying the ECs and reporting categories for those parameters. If you look at that decision tree, the first question that it asks is, does the parameter need to be controlled to ensure product quality? And if you answer yes to that, then the next question in the decision tree is, considering the output of the criticality assessment and the control strategy, what's the potential risk to the product quality if the parameter is changed? So depending on the answer to that question, low, moderate, or high risk would then dictate your reporting category as notification, low, moderate, or a prior approval supplement. And as I mentioned, things in the control strategy, even though a parameter could be considered critical, if you have other things like purge points in your process, then those things could be downgraded to a notification moderate or even a notification low if you can still produce consistent quality at the end of the process. So I think the extent of the ECs that appear in any individual application really depend on the company's development approach, whether they use QBD or not, and then the product and process understanding and potential risk to product quality. So when you make your application, you need to provide the appropriate justification to support those identification first of what's an EC versus your background information, and then propose reporting categories for EC and those aspects that are not considered ECs.
Okay. I understand that in this case study, this is oncology product, and then the approval by US FDA was granted in 2019 before Q12 was officially published by ICH. Can you tell us more about this case study? I remember, I think the first time we tried, it was rejected, if I remember correctly.
Okay, yep. So as you mentioned, this is for an oncology product. It's for lung cancer. In the application, we actually tried something new with quality overall summary. We had a comprehensive quality overall summary, and in that summary, we tried to kind of split the information that was supportive information and include that in a narrative, and then we separated out what we considered established conditions. And I think by calling out the established conditions, that triggered an information request from the FDA, and they wanted us to provide more details about those established conditions, including, you know, reporting categories, which we didn't initially do in the quality overall summary. And so our team quickly put together a response to that request from the agency. And when we submitted that to the FDA, they called us with a teleconference and said, well, you know, this is a lot of information for us to review, and there's only a short time remaining in this priority review. So we're going to ask you to withdraw the established conditions and then resubmit it as a post-approval supplement. And so that's kind of the background history. And then that timing really worked well with the announcement by the FDA of a pilot program for established conditions. So we were able to kind of repackage that whole piece that we worked through in the original application and the query response. So I think for that reason, the timing was really good. Also, this product was a good one to start with. It's a synthetic drug substance that's manufactured using standard processing steps, and it's formulated as a film-coated tablet for once a day administration. It uses compendial excipients and standard batch processing. At the time of the application, we actually had quite a bit of information, more than we normally would have because of the development program and how things went. We had a lot of clinical manufacturing experience at the commercial manufacturing site, and we had a lot of stability data to start with. So for many reasons, it was a really good product for our case study. And then, yeah, so the pilot was announced in February. We made the submission, the prior approval supplement, in July of 2019. And during the review process, we addressed inquiries from the agency, and we participated in teleconferences. We actually had a Type C meeting before the submission. And so there was a lot of conversation back and forth with the regulators. It was new for both of us. I think the pilot was open to 9 different companies that participated with different levels of information. You know, so our case study, we applied the concept of established conditions, the PLCM, across the whole module 3. I think some of the other companies might have only looked at drug substance process or drug product process or packaging, you know, one piece of it. There were some that were biologics and some that were new chemical entities. And so our prior approval supplement was approved in November of 2019, which was right or at the same time that the ICH Q12 was officially published.
How long did it take for US FDA to review this application, Connie, if you remember? I mean, when the day we submit, go ahead.
I think it was around 4 months. So we submitted in early July, I believe, and then it was early November. Yeah, I think it was maybe July 9th to November 9th of 2019. So about 4 months, which is the timeline allowed for prior approval supplement.
Okay, thanks. So as described in the article, US FDA guidance allows us to file alternative analytical method via annual report as long as it provides the same or increased assurance. Does it mean that the license holder will not be able to file alternative method via annual report in the future if the company has implemented Q12 and received the approval of established condition from US FDA? Can you comment on this, Connie?
Yeah, I think that's another really good question. My understanding is that the license holder would still be allowed to file alternate methods via the annual report in the future, even if they have an approved PLCM that details those method-specific established conditions. So the established conditions that would be approved would pertain to the method that was included in the application. And you know, so the company, either by using a parameter or performance-based approach, would be able to justify changes to that specific existing method. In addition, if they decided to have an alternate method, that would still be allowed to be submitted via annual report as per the normal procedure.
Okay, so there are two possibilities approaches, one with the PLCM, which include the established condition, and the other one just a normal route that according to the FDA guidance, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think the big advantage that Q12 then offers is being able to make the changes to your existing method. And, as the article stated, many of the changes that we had listed as established conditions were downgraded from a notification moderate to a notification low. So those could be submitted in an annual report. And actually many of the parameters would be considered as non-ECs, and they would be maintained in the company's PQS, but wouldn't be obligated to submit those changes to the regulatory authority. So that adds a lot of flexibility for us.
Okay. PACMP, like the one that you mentioned before, post-approval change management protocol is one of the tools used in Q12, and it was not submitted to US FDA in this case study. What's the difference between PACMP and PLCM, which is the collection of established conditions? I understand that PACMC would list the conditions to meet industry and require documents for particular change. So does it mean that we have to file PACMC and get the approval before the actual post-approval changes are filed to health authorities? Can you clarify it, Connie?
Yeah, sure. So PACMP, or in the US, we refer to it as a comparability protocol. That is a comprehensive and prospective written plan for a proposed CMC change. So if you submit a PACMP, it allows the agency to review description of one or more proposed CMC post-approval changes, the supporting information that you plan to collect, and including how you're planning to analyze that and a risk assessment activities that you're going to do before you plan to implement that specific change, or if you have multiple changes in there. So if appropriate proposed, you'd also submit in there appropriate proposed reporting category for the change. And as you mentioned, then that protocol would be reviewed by the agency and agreed upon. So a lot of times those PACMPs could include reduced reporting category, something that would take a prior approval supplement. Maybe you could do as a notification moderate. And of course, that reporting category is contingent upon analysis of the data. So whatever you plan to collect, make sure that that still all meets the criteria that you laid out in your plan, and then you could submit it by that reduced reporting category. So that is for a specific plan change. Now the PLCM, as you mentioned, is a collection of established conditions for the product, and it provides reporting categories for each and every one of those established conditions. It's not like one discrete specific change as it is in the PACMP. So I think a simple way to think about it is that the PLCM is like a product specific life cycle management document. Like in the US, we have SUPAC. It's our own version of that for our product, whereas a PACMP is a protocol for a specific change that the license holder is planning to implement.
So is that possible that PACMC would be part of PLCM? I mean, the parameter that we want to change?
Yeah, I think so. And in fact, at Pfizer, we're working on another product to submit established conditions to the FDA. And in that case, we're including both a PLCM and a PACMP. The PACMP is around our near IR method, and then the PLCM has a comprehensive list, as it did for this case study. So definitely, you can include both of those in your application.
So I have another question. So for example, during the NDA submission, and then at that time, we already planned that we want to transfer the manufacturing site from one side to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So this site transfer, should we list this in the PLCM or we just file as a PACMC?
I think you could list in your PLCM the manufacturing site as an established condition, but then if you already know which site you're going to and the details around that, you could include also a PACMP specific to that change from one site to another, and what supportive data that you would include, and then you could possibly downgrade it even further if you, you know, for example, you're going from one site to another site within the same company that has the same overall PQS and whatever supportive data that you want to include in there.
Okay, thanks, Connie. As ICH Q12 is the new concept, and then we still don't know how this would work in the future. Would that be possible in the future that we have multiple versions of PLCM? For example, US PLCM is different from EU PLCM or Japan PLCM. And then what effort or strategy that the industry will take in the future to harmonize this document?
Yeah, I think as you just mentioned, it's really highly likely that we would end up with multiple versions. So far, for our case study, we've only submitted it in the US, so we only have one version, but we fully anticipate as each individual global health authority reviews it, they're going to have their own questions and our own negotiations on whichever aspect. So it's really likely that we're going to end up with multiple versions. And those would each need to be maintained by the license holder. I think it's actually quite similar to our current way of working. You know, for example, for any of our given global products, there could be 10 or so different drug substance release specs that get approved or drug product release specs that get approved.
Yeah.
And the company needs to maintain each of those so that when we are releasing the product for that market, we know that it meets the different limits for assay or degradation products or dissolution or whatever has been approved by that specific market. Those versions get maintained in the company records, and we need to ensure that they're, those locally approved agreements are adhered to. And so by the same concept, when we do a post-approval change, we need to make sure that we would submit that as the agreed reporting category in that market. Now this, ideally, we would like to have one harmonized PLCM that would be approved globally. That's kind of the dream. And I know, I imagine that we would strive for this, even though initially maybe we'd have several different versions approved across the globe. But as we gain that manufacturing experience, I would imagine, just like we do sometimes for differences that we've seen in specification, we'd submit something post-approval to make changes to our PLCM and therefore enable more alignment globally.
Yeah, that's what we wish.
Yeah.
We will. Okay. The next question that I have, I think related to this, let me scroll down to this graph. I hope it's good. Yeah. Can you kindly explain figure 1 and figure 2 in the article to the audience, and how will the reduction of reportable changes would impact the industry?
Yep, sure. So what we did to generate these graphs is we looked at all the different established conditions for our product that were related to either drug substance manufacturing process, drug product manufacturing process, or analytical method changes for either drug substance or drug product. And we then said, okay, if we were to change each of these according to current FDA guidelines, what would be the reporting category? So that first graph on the top is showing you all of those parameters, and the green ones are the methods, the blue ones are the drug substance process, and the yellow ones are the drug product process. It's showing you you'd have about 100 prior approval supplements. And then for notification moderate, it would be even more than that, maybe 115. And then maybe about 50 different things that you could submit by annual report. now, if we went through the process of proposing risk-based reporting categories to the agency and working through that, there were a lot of questions and answers back and forth between the agency, but ultimately where we ended up was agreement on some risk-based reporting category and therefore reduction. So the bottom figure is showing the same categories for methods, process, and drug product process. But now you see that applying the PLCM agreements, we've reduced the number of prior approval supplements and notification moderate and notification low, and those things that then could just be managed in the PQS without reporting them under the not reported bucket are about 115. I don't remember the exact numbers there. So I think what this really shows you is how much additional flexibility that we're able to have, especially for the methods where we see a lot of them going from the prior approval and notification moderate bucket into that not reported bucket. And also for the drug substance process, there were a lot of things in there that normally we would consider anything that we write in the S22 section would be something that we would tell the agency, even if it's just an annual report. But by going through each of them and being very specific in the PLCM, we're able to justify not reporting many of those things, calling them not established conditions, and then not reporting them, but maintaining them in the PQS.
So I think from this graph, we can see that it reduced the workloads for both parties, right? I think the health authority and also the industry, and then we can focus on something else that is more important. I mean, this is a breakthrough for, I think, all parties.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the advantages for, as you mentioned, both industry and for the regulators by clearly deciding up front which of those things are important and which can be maintained up front. It reduces the workload on both ends.
Yeah. Okay, this is my last question to you, Connie, before we open for questions. We understand that US FDA is the first health authority to implement ICH Q12. Do you foresee any other health authority that will most likely follow US FDA footsteps? Do you foresee any future challenges to implement this guideline worldwide?
Mm-hmm. So for our case study, we're planning our next market submission would be in China. We are anticipating that they will announce a pilot program similar to what the US FDA had, and we would very much like to participate in that if it becomes available. We were actually hoping to submit this proposal in Europe earlier this year. However, the EU issued a note that their current regulatory framework would not permit proposal of the risk-based reporting categories at the current time. So they're working on that, and you know, they'll make another announcement once they're ready to accept those proposals. So I foresee that could be an issue in many of the other markets where their current legal framework doesn't allow it, and they need to go through those steps before they can accept those proposals. I see that as a future challenge in implementation of the guideline worldwide. And I think, you know, another challenge is one of your earlier questions about having alignment of the PLCM. So as we go through and have many different individual versions that we have to maintain. So those are a couple of things that I foresee.
Okay. Thanks, Connie.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Let me check the...
Yes, thank you very much for that, Connie. I suppose at this moment we can open it up to the floor. Usually at this stage I would throw in a few questions myself, but I'm afraid the regulatory area is something I work that much in. So you know, I'm not very well versed on it. Also, I'm not sure how many of our audience members today are involved with the regulatory area, but this is your chance to ask Connie a question if you have any.
Hi, Connie. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, I hear you.
Yes, you are.
My name is, thank you. My name is Rupali. I just wanted to ask you one question. Shall we expect some changes in the guidelines for EU or US FDA or any SUPAC guidelines, considering these ICH-12 consideration, change in the submission categories or removing some categories from the guidelines which are already existing?
I actually am not sure about that. I haven't heard any planned changes to the post-approval guidelines, like you mentioned, SUPAC, or even in the EU. I think that the things that they're working through in the EU are more around, you know, how the post-approval submissions are made, and even like the fee structure. Theirs is very different from the US, where you know a lot of their income comes from the submission of the post-approval changes. So the changes in the legal framework that they need, I think, are more associated with that fee structure than with the current post-approval guidelines.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else with a question for Connie?
I have one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. You mentioned about the decision tree. So
Yes.
can we use that decision tree to justify the existing categories, or is it only for the submissions which are not already mentioned in the guidelines? For example, if the guideline says this has to be submitted as a type 2 variation or as a prior supplement, so can we use that to justify that decision tree?
Yeah, so I think if I understand you correctly, you're saying if something is already defined in the guideline. So this is more around the process, which isn't as explicit in the current guidelines because each process is unique to the product. But you can also apply the similar concepts in this for either those process changes or for other changes across the product. And I think we successfully were able to do that in some instances where we had additional supportive data showing that whatever risk that pertained to that particular parameter was mitigated by something else in the process or other aspects, then we could say that the overall risk, instead of being high, was moderate, and therefore, instead of a prior approval supplement, was a notification moderate, for example. So we use this same sort of decision tree, both for defining our reporting categories for process parameters, but also looking at other aspects of the Module 3.
Thank you.
That, in particular, I think, one of the areas that the current ICH Q12 guideline is not as explicit is in the analytical methods. And we propose a performance-based approach in our application and use similar concepts. I think, in our briefing document and also in our Module 3, we took this decision tree and kind of tailored it to how we applied it to the analytical method, but the concept was the same, just more specifics around the method.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Anyone else with a question for Connie? Just while you're thinking there, I'll remind you this is a good opportunity for a little plug for our next Technical Tuesday session, which will be on the 25th of August. It will be single-use technology in drug substance manufacturing. It'll be hosted by Miriam O'Sullivan, who is from Amgen in Singapore. So that's something to pencil into your diary. Anyone with a final question for Connie before we let her get to her breakfast? Okay, well, if that's it, listen, on behalf of us all here in ISP Singapore, thank you very much, Connie, for joining us. Thank you too, Alphonsus, very much for joining us today. We all really appreciate it, and we hope you enjoyed it too, and we hope to see you back here at some point in the future.
Great, thank you, Kieran.
Yep, thanks, Kieran.
Yeah. And thank you, Alphonsus, for facilitating.
Thanks, Connie. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.